sometimes you gotta take a trip down classical lane. Hello guys, welcome, or if you've already seen my channel before, welcome back. I'm the Philadelphia Whovian, and if you've seen any of my previous classic parts of my channel, because usually I do not cover anything outside of usually sci-fi, but every now and again I delve into my love for classic movies and classic literature. And usually I focus on Jane Austen, but truth is I have a passion for lots of classic writers. Jane Austen is my favorite, beyond the shadow of a doubt. Yes, she is not overrated. She is awesome. But also, we have the Bronte sisters. I love the Bronte sisters. And we have other people, we've got George Eliot, who I do overall very much enjoy, Anthony Trollope. But there's another writer who just does not, I think, get enough love. And her name is Elizabeth Gaskell. Elizabeth Gaskell has done a few, classic novels, and some of them have been adapted to screen. And the one we're going to be focusing on right now in my channel, my channel I call Classic Corner, is North and South. Sorry for the glare from all the light in the room, but I am filming during sunlight. North and South. Is that better image? Better image for you? There we go. North and South. Okay. North and South is a movie that stars Daniela Denby Ashe and Richard Armitage as the titular hero and heroine, Margaret Hale and Mr. Thornton. If I said that correctly. I'm not very good at pronouncing that other N in there. And based off of, Elizabeth Gaskell's novel, North and South. And this is why I think it does not get enough love. I think Elizabeth Gaskell, she gets overshadowed by the writers in her time sometimes, but also by Jane Austen herself, who came out before, of course, Elizabeth Gaskell. Because Elizabeth writes during the time of almost like the Industrial Revolution was really in full swing, and also I think during Victorian England. That was her main area that she was in. And that sometimes can be an era where some good writers get lost in the shuffle of all the great writers. Elizabeth is one of those. Now, why am I recommending North and South, and what is up with my title of Dear Jane Austen fans? Please, you should watch North and South, because guys, if you are a Jane Austen fan, you will love North and South. Even though it has the seriousness and the kind of rigidity that was the Victorian values in Victorian era, even though Queen Victoria herself was actually secretly known for being anything else but this cold person. She could be manic, she could be strict sometimes, she could be extreme, but one thing she was not was cold and distant. She was kind of so intense with her emotions that her husband was worried she contracted her uncle's or her uncle's or father's, I believe her uncle's, insanity. Because she was just so colorful when it came to what was happening behind closed doors. But still, what we know as Victorian values itself come from the look of Queen Victoria having a rigid look to her. When people saw her, when she would drive along, when she would ride along outside, when she was just doing her, daily ride or weekly ride, they got a look of a person who was very cold and severe looking. They didn't always know what was happening behind closed doors, but so the Victorian era is known for this cold and sometimes just verbally restrictive environment and time period where emotion was not always conveyed easily, if it was conveyed at all sometimes. And there are many different ways to describe Victorian England. There really are. Could do a whole video on that one. But there were some definitely good sides to it, in the sense of if you were a lower class person, you could be vibrant, of course, all you want to be. When it came to the idea of being a gentleman or a lady, you had to have it's very different than the Regency England. It was just a very sense of just reserved, to the point where you could come across as being a little distant. Even though people think Regency England had that as well, no, there was more flirtation going on in Regency England, and there was more charisma and life and vitality in Regency England than people always care to remember. I think that's something that gets misconstrued. Regency England and Victorian England are not one and the same. Different vibes, and it shows even in the clothing of that times. Especially when it came to the clothing differences of women. Their clothing differences kind of demonstrates their personalities, or it just demonstrates the kind of vibe or the traditions or the behavioral habits of people in that time. One versus the other. So let's not always mix up those two eras of English history. And if I am wrong about any of this, please comment below in this comment section and let me know. I'm just going off of the research I've done from, British people doing documentaries on Regency England versus Victorian England. I'm going off of what people have said and historians themselves. But if I missed anything or I misconstrued anything, don't be afraid to let me know, and I'll research it and I'll apologize. I admit to that. I really, really do. Okay, so now coming in back to North and South. Oh my God. Okay, why I'm saying Jane Austen fans, watch North and South. You will love it, because you will. Because this has Pride and Prejudice undertones to it. We've got is Margaret Hale, a woman who comes from the country of Austen, where she's a very simple and beautiful way of living. Life is peaceful there, it's enjoyable. And then her father uproots her entire family. He leaves his profession. He was a clergyman, leaves his profession, and father clergyman, like Jane Austen's father was a clergyman in the country area, and he comes actually to the North. Hence why North versus South. She represents the South. Thornton represents the North. And they go up to this area, Milton, where it's all industrial. It's an industrial town. And it really is a complete shock to Margaret and her mother, adjusting to a whole different lifestyle and the busyness of it. But when she meets John Thornton, she meets it because she is looking for places to live. They're looking for spaces to rent or live in. And Margaret and her father, they together are looking for houses, or at least, flats, apartments to live in. And she goes to one, and it turns out it is John Thornton is the one who's going to rent this out to her father. But because she's a woman, going out by herself and investigating and finding out where the best places to live, the men who are there looking for properties for her father to rent are not really receiving her properly and not respecting her, or thinking, okay, we can listen to you and we can deal with you. It could be simply also that they, being the daughter, not the husband, they're used to not dealing with daughters. Either way, Margaret Hale is a representation of a strong woman, who's willing to go out and do her own thing. And that's where Margaret Hale has in common with Elizabeth Bennet. Even though their dispositions are kind of different, Margaret is very serene, and she's kind of regarded sometimes as being severe. And Elizabeth is very lively, vibrant, and very witty. But they both are very headstrong women who are described as being headstrong by the environments that they are raised in, or by the people that speak to them. They will do what they wish. They will face a mob of people. They will courageously stand up to people. Even when everyone else is disagreeing with them, they will stand their ground. So their core setup as women is very similar. And also, like Elizabeth Bennet, Margaret Hale is not always well liked. Elizabeth Bennet is one of those women who we, the reader, like, but there are people in her environment around her who do not like her or regard her as being what her mother says, do not carry on your wild ways. Elizabeth was not her favorite daughter. Now, Margaret Hale, both her parents love her tremendously. But when it comes to the people around her, like John Thornton's mother, does not like Margaret Hale very much. His sister does not like Margaret Hale very much at all. So we have that similar character where you got this woman who will say what she, thinks, will speak her mind, will actively go out and be independent and adjust to situations very quickly, but also was slightly mistaken in the man who she was at odds with. And that brings us to John Thornton. John Thornton, look at that face. I mean, if that face does not say Mr. Darcy, I don't know what face does. But John Thornton, like it is with Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth, they meet in very circumstances where they are going to misunderstand each other and be at odds with each other. Remember how Mr. Darcy offended Elizabeth Bennet at the dance, at the assembly room? Remember that? Well, in this one, we got a different perspective. We see even kind of a harsher initial introduction, where Margaret goes to the factory that John Thornton works. He owns and runs a cotton factory, and she sees him beating up another person, one of his workers, because the worker was smoking in the factory. And he beats him up and dismisses him. And Margaret runs up to him and says, please stop hitting him, please stop. And John Thornton does not know who she is yet, turns to her and shouts, get that woman out of here. But here's the thing. These are two people who you could argue they're on two different sides of the situation. She is right for not liking him when they first meet because he is so brutal with his reaction to this man smoking in the room that of course he's frightened. Of course she is frightened because it's such an extreme, such vehemence. Shows that if you're vehement to this person, then you can be vehement and violent in any other situation. You can be. But with his situation, he had every reason you could argue to beat the crap out of that guy. Because he was smoking in the factory. If the pipe had gotten and touched something, or it started, if it touched some cotton, etc. and so forth. Sorry if I'm getting tongue-tied. Sometimes I do not speak the best. But he could have set the whole factory on fire when he was smoking the pipe. And John Thornton has seen this happen before, where he saw a whole factory go up in smoke and flames because someone was smoking in the factory. And when that happened, it wasn't just the factory that burned down. All these people, these factory workers, died because of this fire. So John Thornton brutally beating him up, it's also in reaction to what he saw in the past, but also it's giving, you could argue, it is giving a harsh, but also probably giving a proper reprimand and punishment. So this guy, by punching him and then dismissing him, this guy now learns the repercussion to his actions of do not put other people in danger because you want to smoke in the factory. I understand where both of these people are coming from. I understand why Margaret is just a little uncomfortable around him because she meets him in this place where he is violent. And if he's violent to this person, he could be violent to anyone. And remember, this is a time where there was the rule of thumb, where it was said in the 1800s, sometimes it was legal. It was very much legal for a man to beat his wife, so as long as he did not use a stick that was no wider than his thumb. So, you got these two people who are at odds with each other, but there is something about them that has so much chemistry. Oh my God, the chemistry between these two, I can't explain it. But wow, it's incredible. Like, you just feel the passion bubbling underneath. Even when Margaret Hale does not like him, John Thornton, you still feel a chemistry there. And John, you see him growing feelings for her, even though they disagree with each other on so many things. And also, when they do, it's like Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy. They're at odds with each other, but when they do, they are in line with each other, and when they do get along with each other, you feel the connection and you feel it intensely. And that's what's happening with John Thornton and Margaret Hale. Also what's happening in the backdrop of this is the idea of unions and strikes, because John Thornton is a factory owner. So, and it's a time where there were strikes and there were unions. And the reason why this was the case was because, of course, naturally the workers want more higher pay when they have not been promoted or have not gotten higher pay or raises in years. But at the same time, it's complicated on the owner's parts because they have to deal with the reality of going under. So, there is the idea of the workers going on strike, and Margaret Hale, she's caught in the middle of this because she befriends some of the workers, but then you got John Thornton and her father who speaks with, and he also dines with all of the factory owners. So you have the wealthy owners or the semi-wealthy owners, the factory owners versus the factory workers, two different sides of this industrial problem. And Margaret Hale is on, she literally has to deal with the reality. There's a class war here almost. And she's on both sides of it, or she's trying to be on both sides of it. She sympathizes with the workers, and she stands up for them even when they're going on strike, even when they are on strike, She sympathizes with them, and she even brings food to those workers when they are on strike to help feed their families. But then you got John Thornton and all the factory owners who are looking down on her for doing this. And I'm not going to spoil too much, but this is filled with misunderstandings, pride, and prejudice. It really is. But needless to say, when everything works out at the very end, you are so relieved. In that last moment, when John Thornton and Margaret Hale do come to accept each other, for what they both are, it's just so amazing. It just knocks you off your feet. When Darcy and Elizabeth from Pride and Prejudice grew to accept each other for what they were, you felt the magnitude and the weight of it. And remember how when you read or watch Pride and Prejudice, each time you're hoping that Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet are going to get together, even though you know they already are, you still watch it or read it in hopes of that happening. That's what happens when you watch North and South. You know what's going to happen, but you still hope for it to happen anyway. And that is pretty darn remarkable. So guys, have you ever heard of Elizabeth Gaskell? Have you ever seen North and South? By God, I recommend you seeing it. Sorry for the glare of the lighting. I'm filming during the sunlight. It can be pretty intense. I can. But North and South. Have you seen it? You should. Dear Jane Austen lovers, I think you would very much enjoy this. So thank you guys so very much for watching. I am the Philadelphia Whovian. I hope to see you again very, very soon. You were all absolutely delightful. Peace out, guys.